Welcome to part 2 of my Elden Ring design retrospective. In this video, we'll be talking about animation, and nothing else. Now, I'm a bit surprised that my discussion on animation has a runtime this long, but Elden Ring's animations are very interesting from a prioritization and development perspective. The game has some consistently excellent areas of animation, and other animations are, The animations department, assuming that this is how they structure their team, is kind of the only area of the game where, within the same discipline, the game shows such a gross disparity in quality, with combat and combat-related features, like creatures, once again taking priority in spending over everything else. And based on the game's critical reception, wisely so. But the non-combat related animations, like the traversal animations or conversations, are sometimes jarring in how low quality they are. In some ways, the animation department is a representative sample of the quality goals set by the game as a whole. Combat is the priority. Everything else needs to be just good enough. As I stated in the last video, combat animations are weighty, impactful, and diverse. They're also very, very satisfying.
Oh! That was cool.
The massive number of unique weapon animations, weapon arts, spells, and incantations enable an extensive array of builds to not only exist, but to feel and play distinctly, with pretty much every weapon I tried out feeling great. It is no easy feat to make combat feel great with a single weapon type, but this game does it with over 20 weapon types, and the player animations plays an enormous role in that success. This same level of quality also extends to the enemies, with attack animations that are generally well telegraphed and fair. They do a great job of differentiating all the creature types, while also logically aligning with each creature's body type or weapons. Enemy movement and behavior is great, it's unique, and it communicates personality through animation. I will always remember you, Erdtree Watchdog.
Erdtree Burl Watchdog. What's up, homie? Can you see me? Whoa, that thing is creepy! Oh my god! That thing is terrifying! Awesome design though, super creepy. Really impressively creepy. Man, I hate it! I hate it so much!
Overall, the combat animations in this game are awesome.
Jesus Christ!
Another major component of animation that contributes to Elden Ring's core gameplay are the traversal animations. And Elden Ring's traversal animations started a fairly nuanced, combative discussion within my brain. When I started my playthrough of the game, I was highly critical of them, and even through making this video, my perspective on them has changed. At least a little bit. Simply put, they do not look good. But they're responsive to the player's inputs. When you move your analog stick, the player character is prompt in replicating those movements. Elden Ring clearly sacrifices animation fidelity in favor of responsive controls. In stripping away traversal animation complexity, be it things like animating pivots or changes of direction, the player character becomes more responsive, though they are less believable and natural to look at. To discuss this topic further, and for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to look at game traversal animations on a continuum, with high responsiveness at one end, meaning controls that give immediate and accurate feedback to one's inputs, and high fidelity at the other end, meaning believable and natural movement. Generally, if a game's controls and animations are highly responsive, it probably has lower fidelity traversal animations. And if a game has high fidelity animations, it probably has lower responsiveness. This is an oversimplification, and there are obvious exceptions to this. But usually, assuming the player character is a humanoid of some sort, the higher fidelity your traversal animations are, the higher risk there is at taking away some responsiveness from the player's controller input. If we were to place Elden Ring on this continuum to examine its traversal animations, it would heavily prioritize responsiveness over fidelity. Okay, for a totally scientific experiment to demonstrate the responsiveness-fidelity continuum, when you do this, in Elden Ring, this is what the player character does. It's a pretty direct representation of the player's inputs, with no clear interpolations in movement animations or animations of direction changes. What you put in is what you get out. It's clearly low fidelity, but it's responsive. But other successful high-budget games often tend to toe the line a little more evenly between responsiveness and animation fidelity, or sometimes they even prioritize fidelity over responsiveness. Here are some examples.
Doing okay back there, BD1?
Even games that have great melee combat, or combat similar to From Software games, do tend to give a higher priority to fidelity than Elden Ring did, with mixed results. I understand this is a bit of a silly comparison, and it shows some of these animation systems in the worst possible light, but they do display how different games prioritize their movement and animation fidelity, with all of them prioritizing some degree of animation fidelity over pure responsiveness. Even Elden Ring has a pivot animation if the player sprints and about faces, but that seems to be more of a gameplay choice than an attempt at animation fidelity because it doesn't happen when the player's running, so I don't know. If you want to see some pure responsiveness, check out some older games like WoW. That game makes almost no compromises to its movement responsiveness for the sake of visual fidelity, and the controls are tight because of that. When you compare Elden Ring with something like Jedi Fallen Order, you can clearly see that Respawn Entertainment tried to make animation more believable while maintaining a relatively high degree of responsiveness, which allows me to do these edge case wacky controller inputs you see. But does the degree to which the fidelity is improved really justify whatever reduction in responsiveness it might cause? And I mean throughout the whole game, not just when you're spinning in a circle. And in order to make it look significantly better, is it worth the sacrifice to responsiveness? That answer is going to vary from game to game, where different types of combat, or other core gameplay mechanics, will require different levels of movement responsiveness. In a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, Rockstar's creation of some of the smoothest, highest fidelity animations you will ever see throughout all of the game systems came at a huge sacrifice to the game's responsiveness. Really, it's hard to make this game's animations look bad even if you try, and the game builds rewarding combat around its sluggish controls. It also has an overwhelming amount of features and content that take advantage of its high-fidelity animations that can help offload the entertainment burden from the combat. But the game's controls are not immediately responsive to your inputs. That said, this is the right choice for a game like Red Dead 2, which prioritized creation of an immersive world with believable characters over control of responsiveness. Can you imagine if the player character in Red Dead moved like this? On the flip side, because Elden Ring is so driven by a specific type of gameplay, having controls that make the player feel like they're moving through molasses, no matter how smooth the animation might be, would significantly diminish the game's strongest feature. It's always fascinating to me to see how different studios determine how much responsiveness they're willing to sacrifice for visual fidelity, and vice versa. Right out of the gate, it was obvious that Elden Ring's controls felt great and were hyper-responsive as a result of their choice to limit movement fidelity. But that didn't stop me from scoffing at its animation when I first played it.
Oh, this definitely looks like a From Software game. Say it's, oh Jesus. Okay. Quite good. Combat feels good. The traversal animations are terrible. Man. Woo. Those are rough.
What an ignorant jerk! Counter to my initial reaction, overall, I like the balance that Elden Ring has struck. I think it's possible to make an animation system that's higher in fidelity and is as responsive as the players expect it to be. But when a fanbase has relatively low expectations for fidelity and high expectations for responsiveness based off their experiences with previous games, and the fact that it's very expensive to develop high fidelity, high responsive animation systems, I think that From Software made a smart investment of their money. They just kept it simple. It's a win-win. Low fidelity animations are cheap and responsive, and that's what fans are expecting of the game. And when playing a game like Elden Ring, there's obviously some loss of responsiveness during attack animations. But that unresponsiveness plays into the properties and playstyles of different weapon types. So Elden Ring has higher animation fidelity at visually impactful times, but they also get highly responsive movements. Woo, woo, woo! Now, with all that said, From Software did skimp on some traversal animations that wouldn't necessarily make the game less responsive, like dynamically adjusting animations to look more natural when running over obstacles, or working on an IK system to make running over rough terrain more fluid. But considering it used to be part of my job to plan the systems and build environments that would conform to the limitations of an animation system in an attempt to make them look good, I probably care about this infinitely more than the average player.
Oh man. Oh my god.
Yeah, good enough. Elden Ring is also lacking some of the smaller details or polish that you might expect from other games, like idle animations, a dramatic change in animation when walking up slopes at different angles, change in animation when the player character is severely injured, contextual animations in certain environments or weather patterns. The game cuts a lot of corners in making believable animations and characters outside of combat, which, for me, resulted in the player character and the non-player characters feeling pretty hollow. Moving on. The theme of quality disparity extends to the game's in-engine cutscenes and conversations. Elden Ring has some beautiful cutscenes that, while brief and sparse, are exceptionally well directed, animated, and lit. They're just lovely. However, the animations used in conversations are either extremely primitive, repetitive, or non-existent. These two game features, which are often covered by the same team, are so dramatically different in quality. One is really well done, the other just exists. And unlike the lower fidelity of traversal animations, which can be justified as a way to increase responsiveness, that same rationale cannot be applied to the game's conversations or facial animations.
Saluvis's rise. Oh, is this the dick? Ah, yes. I mean, another mask, another face they don't have to animate. Hi.
Maybe From Software knew their facial animations were going to smell like tonsil stones, so that's why they made so many characters wear masks? I mean, how can we criticize the fidelity of their facial animations if they don't put them in? Touché, From Software, touché. Elden Ring doesn't even attempt to use technologies that will automate facial animations, or try to animate conversations through a library of pre-canned animations, like a Mass Effect. Characters flap their yaps open and closed on loop with no attempt to sync the speech to the voicing, generally while standing or sitting, still, unmoved, through the entire game. Or they'll repeat the exact same action for the entirety of their existence. The NPCs don't have any patrol routes, so you'll never see them walking around, and I don't think you ever see them interacting or talking with each other in any way. They're effectively well-modeled, poorly animated signposts that populate the world. The underdevelopment of NPC conversation animations made many of the characters feel quite artificial, which created a barrier for me to connect with them or care about them. Despite my extensive playthrough of Elden Ring, unfortunately I didn't emotionally connect with many of the game's characters. Apart from a few standouts like Roger, Alexander, and Kenneth Haidt, I don't recall the names or goals of so many of the NPCs I encountered. And if I can remember their names or their goals, I didn't really care about them. The game's voice acting is largely strong enough to fill the void presented by the fidelity of the conversation animations, but for a player like me, I suspect that I would have connected with characters more easily if they were presented in a more engaging fashion, through better animations and perhaps an optional cinematic camera. Development time is, of course, finite, but for selfish purposes, maybe the team could have budgeted slightly differently to make their character interactions a little more engaging. There's probably more frame data in a single creature's animation set than in every conversation animation combined. That's probably not actually true. By sacrificing a creature or two, they could have maybe gotten more life into the conversations with the NPCs through some sort of systemic means. However, I can't be confident that that would have made a net positive experience for the average player. Despite my criticisms, it's clear that From Software did an excellent job planning, prioritizing, and executing the features for its intended audience and game vision through Elden Ring. The things it executes well, it executes very well, and the things that it doesn't execute well don't seem to be a huge limitation to the game's success. Which, to be honest, sometimes still surprises me. The conversation animations are so fucking bad. From Software knows its target audience, knows its budget, invested its money wisely, and executed its vision very well. I guess that's it for my discussion around animation. Before I say goodbye for now, I want to acknowledge that this video may seem more critical than my previous one, and I think that theme might continue into the next videos. But this entire retrospective series is just me wrestling with my own cognitive dissonance in assuming that certain features, like smooth traversal animations and believable character interactions, are important in a game like Elden Ring, when clearly they're not. In some ways, the more time I spend discussing something in these videos, the more that feature misaligned with my expectations or design ideals, even when those design ideals might not be the right choice for Elden Ring. Playing Elden Ring was both a humbling and educational experience, and I look forward to further challenging my perspectives in the next video. Thanks for your time. Goodbye.